Majin take a taxi late at night and out of nowhere, a passenger disappears without a trail. Want to find out what really happened? So stay with me until the end of this video because the story you will hear now is chilling. It was a Friday, almost dawn. Ended my duty watching the seconds so I can leave. In that moment, the avenues were serene, less congestion and air was slightly more fresh. I just thought of getting home, take a shower, and rest. Had already done sufficient races, and the profit of the day was assured, was when my communicator issued a call requesting service in the North Zone. I thought in not answering, but I ended up stumbling up after all. It would be another route to complete the night in style, driving by Rio de Janeiro. Afternoon at night. Always reserve surprises, and a last-minute race usually yields a good bonus. I went straight to the place indicated. The Northern Zone is extensive and full of contrasts, has expensive areas and also the simpler neighborhoods the place. It was a residential set of those good silent. I arrived without delay, 10 or 15 minutes. When I parked before the house, I waited a few moments, but no one. I came up with the communicator to confirm the called, and in the meantime I looked at the rear-view mirror and noticed a girl leaving in a hurry of an alley. She looked in shock, ran straight to the door of the car and entered the back seat, closing. The door suddenly bloody, appeared to be about 30, dark hair and long damaged clothes. Even before I asked what happened, she leaned ahead and spoke in a voice anguished. "Take me to the emergency room quickly." I didn't hesitate. I started the engine and I left singing tire on the way. She remained, Colado, just moaning in pain. I tried start conversation but only repeated that needed to reach the emergency room while I, roading the city, the heart beat hard. I ignored what had happened to that passenger, but it was evident that she was going through a desperation. The avenues were empty and each traffic light took centuries. Every minute the distress increased until finally, after a period that seemed to last a life, we came to emergency room, parked in the entrance area, emergency, and turned to help the girl leaving the vehicle. But when I looked for the rear seat, she was gone. I checked around parking. I called security people of the hospital, but no one had seen it. Getting out of the taxi looked like I had missing. I was astonished there without getting. Understanding how it can have gone that way was as if it hadn't even been there. Police was called and reported everything that they had occurred. They asked usual questions, examined the car, but did not find any track that clarified the disappearance from her, sent me to leave and warned that would care if they needed more details. I returned home in that night with the upset mind. I couldn't assimilate what the memory had happened of the injured and distressed girl tormented me. What would it be like because it was so? Suddenly after that experience I passed days sleeping badly. Her figure with injuries and your enigmatic start chased me. I tried to find a reason, logic, but nothing fitted working, trying to resume routine and erasing the episode, but the anguish continued the week. Next arrived again on Friday. Work was quiet, and I already had completed good trips, was almost closing another day of services, enthusiastic to return to home and leave the weirdments of the driver function. There was when the communicator sounded again, requesting a transfer in the same Northern Zone. Address coincided with that of the previous occasion. A shiver traveled my back, but I decided to face that. I presumed that I could be coincidental or perhaps a prank, but deep down I felt that something bigger was related to that, called Drype. Until the address, the heart fired the each block. Getting there, everything was apparently normal, but I kept warning. I was waiting in the car, watching the region, waiting for some movement until from the same dark alley the same girl emerged, running again, bloody and desperate. It seemed identical to the image of the week past, as if nothing has changed. It entered the car quickly, and before I don't even ask her, shouted, "Take me for the emergency room quickly." Without hesitation, I called the motor, and start was an authentic déjà vu. Everything looked like a perfect replay. From the previous scene, she remained silent in rear seat, only by releasing moans of pain. I tried to question it and understand what it was going on, but did not react by repeating that needed to go to the emergency room. City was empty again. The red signs tested my patience. The anxiety went up and the dread, mixed with curiosity. We arrived to the emergency room, and I stopped exactly where I had stopped. The other time I turned fast to help her go down, but as before she disappeared, I didn't contain the shock left from the taxi and ran screaming for help. The security people approached and I explained everything again. They stared at me with a mix of doubt, but they called. The police, still the agents who came, they were the same. Of the previous week repeated the questions and surveyed the car again. Without finding anything, I started questioning. My sanity would be fantasizing all this, but the impression of that was true, was too strong to ignore. I described everything to the police, but they appeared to think that I, delirious, after things were serene, released to return to my house. But this, instead of driving, I stood still in the car for a moment, trying to understand what happened, what that woman wanted, why she always arose at the same point and evaporated upon to the hospital after the second meeting. The facts were even more intriguing. The police were still skeptical. They already saw me like some disturbed or someone who wanted attention. I came back to active, seeking to ignore the bloody passenger and both nights surreal, but the feeling that something big was out of place. I avoided taking races to the North Zone for a period, preferring to act in other regions of the city. The days went, routine continued. Customers common returned to occupy my daily life, and the common conversations with passengers helped me disperse thoughts. Yet each time I dusk, I felt a silent fear that everything was the police again, stopped listening to me. They made some basic steps where I sought such a passenger, but found nothing trace of confrontation, evidence of someone hurt or missing in that locality. Even suggested that I sought therapy, which only generated more discouraged by time I stopped insisting in the subject. It was no use staying rooming something no one I believed. I opted to focus on my commitments and in my life, trying to bury those episodes, but still every time I passed near the emergency room or that zone, I felt a chill in the column, the memories of the stained car, the distressing screams of that woman and her disappearance, indecipherable, remained alive in my mind. Mattered little how much I tried to forget, that was already part. From me, I never discovered what was truth in that story, and may never find out background. I understood that some things have no explanation. Of Metropolis is full of secrets, and in certain cases is better to leave some doubts. No answers, just want wherever she's. That woman has reached the peace I sought while I follow, driving my car through the streets of Rio de Janeiro, with an eye on each request, but always with caution, in the expectation that that nightmare never come back. My name is Marcos, and I work as a driver in Curitiba. Makes almost 2 decades that I have to practice and have already witnessed everything. At that date, an ordinary Thursday, I received a request close to 11 at night. It was to catch a customer in a stretch most remote, a somewhat rural area of city. I thought not to go, but the possibility of an extensive race and the extra amount ended up convincing me to drive to the address by a little earth road illuminated. The vegetation was dense and the hearts of the trees launched dark shapes in the floor. My car shook every hole and the loneliness got stronger. When I stopped, I saw no person, the whisper of the leaves and the distant noise of a stream. I thought of giving up when I realized a silhouette slowly advancing. My direction was a guy walking with steps, heavy as if each movement were painful. He wore costumes that remembered another time and stained as if they had left straight from an old movie. He stopped next to the vehicle and he stared at me with a fixed look. His eyes, they were inert, dull, but at the same time, there was in them a deep sadness without saying nothing. He opened the door and settled in. The inside of the car was suddenly cold, and a cold in the spine awakened me. "Good night," he greeted in a hoarse voice, and tiredness mentioned the address of a place that I was unaware of. but I accepted to take him. Something in that man made me apprehensive, but curiosity and the intention to complete the trip. The road on the road spoken louder of land. It seemed infinite. The vacuum in the environment was suffocating, broken only by the noise of the engine and the friction of the tires in the floor. I tried to chat, but he responded with a few words or simply stirred the head. The tension in the air was almost physical, as if something terrible were to happen. Our destination was an old and forgotten house wrapped in bush with destroyed windows. When finally we arrived, I looked back to warn that we reached the place, and to my amazing, the bank was unoccupied. The man disappeared without leaving evidence, and the cold of before dissipated. As by charm, I got out of the car, still in shock, and evaluated the surroundings. The place the most seemed scenario of a horror movie, with silence that bothered me to prepare to go back to car, when I spotted a form on the porch of the house. Yes, was the same subject, but now it was different. There was a spectral flash around it, as if it were formed by mist. "You must be curious about what is happening," he said. His voice now resonated in a way supernatural. I crashed, incapable to say anything. He kept my name Marcelo, and a long time ago lived in this residence with my family. Right morning, a fire started while everyone slept. My wife and children failed. Run away, I survived, but not for much time. I died of pity shortly after, loaded by the fault of not having saving them. As he spoke, I realized figure of a woman and 2 children who graduated next to him, all covered with soot, with marked, frightened expressions in their faces. Since then, I'm stuck here without peace. Each night I ask a ride, hoping to tell my story, believing that one day you can rest. I don't. I had words. My heart beat disorderly, and a terrible chill spread. "Please," he said, "don't let us fall into oblivion. Disclose our story so that we are not ignored." Before that I could react, them disappeared. Only one breeze, Gelida. I ran back to the car, and I accelerated away as soon as I could. My whole body trembled, and my head was taken by 1,000 thoughts. In the days that came, I tried to resume the routine daily, but I couldn't get rid of that had happened that night. Every time I looked at the rearview mirror via the image of Marcelo, your sad eyes staring at me. At first I thought I was going crazy, but his presence persisted in each surface that reflected my image. Each trip became a martyrdom. Each stop I remembered the horror I witnessed. I started not wanting to drive tonight, but even in the light of day, I saw the figure of Marcelo sad and calado. Next to me, a night when trying to sleep, I heard your voice. Again, muttering near my ear, "Do not forget us, milestones. Do not abandon us." Those words resonated in my mind, and I realized that I could never shade. My existence turned upside down. I abandoned the service and started to isolate myself, avoiding any mirror where you could reviewing it. The guilt and dread consumed me, and this Marcelo, me, continuous company, left almost insane to this day. Writing this account, I feel your eyes about me, waiting for me to fulfill my promise to share your drama. Maybe doing this I get a little relief. But the truth is that I will never find out with clarity. Marcelo and his family will follow, haunting me like a constant reminder of the invisible world and the weight of past. I was about to end my on duty when the car communicator played, asking to get someone in a neighborhood distant. I thought about refusing. After all, I was exhausted and wanted to return, but the curiosity and the possibility of gaining some additional change spoke louder, so I followed to the point, mentioned a very away from the deserted street and the silence only broken by rotation engine. With each curve, the feeling that something strange is approached. It was growing upon reaching the address. I realized I was facing a field Santos. The imposing trees and the gate rusty composed an even more image shadowy. I looked around, trying to find some indicative of movement. Was when I saw a subject emerge from the shadows, walking in my direction. He wore a classic costume, looked out of season, and couldn't see your countenance immediately. as it was half covered by the hat that brought. When he came closer to lighting of the lighthouse, revealed a pale face, and without expression, the subject got into the car, and based on the back seat, appeared normality. But there was something weird about him that I didn't manage to explain. He provided the destination at another end of city without questioning. I turned on the taximeter and started the trip in the beginning. Everything flows. The customer commonly remained silent, staring at the landscape. I tried comment on the mood, saying how cold was it, just answered a yes, without taking his eyes off the window that made me uncomfortable. But I continued to lead each attempt to conversation. How to ask if he lived far from there. He talked about monosyllables. Something in it increased my discomfort, then decided to be aware of direction and ignore that bizarre impression. The way was empty, and public lighting formed strange contours on the floor. Empty inside the car was suffocating, as if something invisible was there with us, was when I noticed a detail more amazing. Man does not reflected the luminosity of the vehicle panel. I looked again at the rearview mirror, and I proved terrified that he didn't have shadow. My eyes widened and a guile wave traveled my body. I searched control me by imagining being just hallucination. While we continued the route, that feeling of abnormality only grew. Decided accelerate, cheering to complete soon the route and end that situation. Strange. Finally, when we approached the indicated place, he asked that I stop the car before an old house with heavy curtains in the windows. It seemed abandoned. He extended me the value exact race without having to change. Without further explanation, he left the car, and before I could move, disappeared in the darkness. I stood there trying to digest what had happened. I took the money delivered and realized that the banknote still cold, almost as ice. The empty and the silence that followed were anguishing. I turned on the engine and headed there as soon as possible, wanting to escape that feeling of fear. But I knew that night would be recorded forever in my memory. I came back for my house with my head to 1,000 to try to understand what had happened, could not forget the image of that man and the complete lack of shadow. All it seemed out of reality. I tried to believe that the tiredness was affecting me and that the mind preached pieces the other day. At breakfast, I shared the fact with my companion. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and distrust, advising that I resting more and not taking trips. So afternoon I agreed, but deep down I was sure that what I had witnessed was real. Followed my driver job, but passed to avoid that region of the cemetery. Eventually, I thought about the subject's sinister, and in its strange escape, the money he had given me despite cold. That night it seemed common now. I kept those notes as a memory than I lived, but never. Again, I played them, never known who or what he was. One of those enigmatic cases that the existence, sometimes it puts in our course without any explanation. And still here I am, remembering alone while I drive afternoon a denth, reflecting on how certain sometimes the inexplicable it is closer than we can imagine. Before we start, be sure to subscribe to the channel and leave your like to support our content. Now, let's go straight to this mystery.